Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man, and today we're taking a look at the Warhammer 40,000 MetaWatch. This video is sponsored by CMO Games. More on that later. Warhammer 40,000 MetaWatch, the first win rates from the new edition. So I went through and watched the whole video and everything. We'll take a look at the article, and then I'm going to lay it out there, and I'm not going to hold any punches on this one. I have been very gracious with 10th edition and Games Workshop, their level of balance and just overall competence. And in this video, I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to tell you exactly how I think it is. But before we do, let's get educated. We finally had some time to sink our teeth deep into the new edition of Warhammer 40,000. And with plenty of matches and a few major tournaments under our belt, it's time to root through the vast reams of data that we've collected for some solid competitive insights. Nick from the Warhammer team sat down with Stu from the Warhammer studio to crunch the numbers. Factions that began the new edition with a spring in their step, such as the Imperial Knights and Genestealer cults, continue to overperform, even after balance adjustments to the Eldari Strands of Fate ability and towering units. So that is a strange sentence right there, because they talk about the Imperial Knights, they talk about the Genestealer cult, and then they say, oh my gosh, they're still really good, even after we balanced the Eldar Strands of Fate and towering keywords. Well, Genestealer cult don't have Strands of Fate or towering, so I have no idea how that's even relevant. Imperial Knights obviously have towering, and Eldari obviously have Strands of Fate. So it would have made a lot more sense if they mentioned either all three right there, Imperial Knights, Genestealer cult, and Eldari, or if they at least threw some kind of like nerf in there that hit Genestealer cults, which obviously they didn't do one. So strong factions typically influence the entire competitive environment, as rival armies are built to combat specific units and archetypes, meaning the Warhammer studio have to anticipate the impact of even minor changes might have on other factions. So how do the standings look after nearly 2 months of competitive play? Spoiler alert, they are absolutely terrible. This is by far the worst Warhammer 40,000 has ever been. Now, I'm not saying 10th edition is terrible. I'm not saying it's not a good edition and there's no way we can save it. I'm just saying right now, when we look at this MetaWatch, this is by far the worst imbalance we have ever seen since Games Workshop started doing this. All right, so here we have it. Our faction tier list by win rate. So we have faction first, then we have win rate percent. And the goal here is for everybody to lie right around this 50% range. We have a 5% margin to the downside, 5% margin to the upside. So we can basically rate Games Workshop's ability to balance their own game, which they created, by this. So every faction in a perfectly balanced game would fall right at 50%. In a very well-balanced game, every faction would fall within the 45 to 55% margin that Games Workshop is shooting for. So basically, anybody that's past this light blue bar right here is too good. So we see our 4 top performers right there, all very strong, way too strong. And then we see 11 in the middle area. The 45 is just barely squeaking into that gray area. So we have 11 there. And then we have 11 more that are underperforming, that are under that level. So we have 11 underperformers, we have 11 balanced factions, and then we have 4 overperformers. So of our 26 factions, only 11 sit within the acceptable range of balance. 11 of 26. I mean, that is a complete failure, a failing score, a complete inability to create a fair rule set and then balance said rule set. And the worst part is, that's not even just right out of the gate looking at the stats. Games Workshop has already stepped in and made multiple changes to the edition, to points, and then also rules changes as well. So they've already made points adjustments and rules changes, and only 11 of the 26 factions on this list fall within the acceptable range. That is a complete failure. That is under any metric a failure to create a balanced, fun game. So let's take a look at the overperformers, the underperformers, and then I'm going to give you guys my honest opinion why certain factions are so good. So Eldari still at the top, 67%, far too good. The maximum anyone should be that 55% in an ideal world. We know why they're too good. They had some undercosted units initially. Even after the points bumps, those units are still undercosted. They have some very strong indirect fire. They're fragile, which is supposed to be their weakness, but in this edition, everything is really killy. So pretty much everything is fragile as soon as it gets shot. So the Eldari are extremely quick, extremely mobile. They have a lot of fly keyword. They have shenanigans that allow them to move after they shoot. They have things like fire prisms that allow you to position one unit out in the open and then channel weapons from other units that can't be seen through that unit. and then afterwards move that unit back behind cover. So they have a lot of smooth little tricks and things that can really cause problems for people. Next, we have Genestealer cults. Again, they're very, very fragile. They die to a stiff breeze, but they're at 63% because of all of their like antics. They have the ability to bring back units. They have the ability to use blips to reposition them as they please. They essentially break the rules of the game in many of the same ways that the Eldari do. Normally, you have phases of the game where you're allowed to do stuff, and there are limits to what you can do. Genestealer cults have tons of rules that just completely break how the game works. They're allowed to come in within 3 inches of you instead of having to be 9 inches away, so it's much more difficult to screen them out, and just lots of other abilities like that. And then next we have Imperial Knights. So once again, Imperial Knights, 57%, so just outside the acceptable range actually, after some changes. I suspect Imperial Knights will once again get stronger. They're going to do better now because of that Knight Lancer. Obviously, it already had rules, already had a model, but it was only available from Forge World. Now with the new plastic kit and it basically selling out worldwide, we know that whatever the max amount of these things that could have sold have been bought. So I would expect them to start showing up in mass on the tournament scene, as they are extremely good as well. So I would expect Imperial Knights actually to get better because of the new release of a Horus Heresy model, as crazy as that sounds. Once again, what is the main issue with Imperial Knights? Well, they break the rules of the game. The towering keyword allows you to basically bypass cover. So in my opinion, when we look at the top 3 factions, the 3 factions that are all outside of the acceptable win rate, the 3 factions that are clearly not falling within the acceptable balance, all 3 of them do the same thing in a different way. They all break the rules of the game. And the reason you make rules is so that everybody's on the same playing field. Obviously, all of these factions are going to be at least somewhat different, if not way different. But the very clear issue that we see with all 3 of the top performers is they break the rules of the game. So that is the issue. The issue is not one little rule here or a couple of points there. It's that Games Workshop has written a rule set and 3 of the factions don't have to follow those rules. Imperial Knights don't respect the cover rules in the same way. Genestealer cults don't respect, death and deep strike rules and many other little like janky things in the same way. And Eldari don't respect line of sight and whatnot in the same way. So I think there's your problem right there. We've identified what the issue is. The factions that don't have to play by the same rules as everyone else are doing extremely good. And those are your top tier factions. You're welcome, Games Workshop. So then moving on from there, we have Adeptus Custodes, very strong. They are slightly higher. We saw a bunch of people showing up with big bricks of Custodes, Collidus Assassins, and Exaction Squads. It's a very popular, very strong list. It's fairly simple to play, slightly better than it should be, but I think overall Custodes are okay at 56 when you're shooting for 55. Then we see all of the acceptable armies. Thousand Suns have strong psychic, durable, and some cool stuff. Chaos Demons, again, 52%, very strong. Tyranids at 51%. That is a big surprise, honestly. Typically, the factions that are in the starter boxes, like Space Marines and Tyranids in this case, are not going to perform well because you're just going to have a bunch of people that are relatively new or maybe not like tournament level players that are just getting into the scene or are just playing competitively. So to see the Tyranids at 51% is honestly impressive. Then we go on from Deathwatch. So they received a very, very early nerf that stopped them from doing an insane amount of mortal wounds. So that was all it took to put them in the acceptable range. Then we see Necrons strong at 49%, still doing good. Orcs at 47%. Chaos Space Marines, even after losing a bunch of units, 47%. We see Chaos Knights are at 47%. So here's a good example. So we have Chaos Knights at 47%. They have all of the same like towering type rules and many of the same like army type rules. Many of the same units, give or take a couple little like abilities. They're at 47%. Imperial Knights are at 57%. The real issue here, honestly, that separates the Imperial Knights from the Chaos Knights is the Feel No Pain. The ability to have 6 up Feel No Pain right out of the gates and then 5 up Feel No Pain after you achieve your oath makes them very, very strong. Because doing like 24 or 28 wounds is already difficult. If you have to do another 33% on top of that, so instead of doing 24 damage, you have to do 32 damage to kill the same knight, that makes them substantially more durable. So we see the issue is that knights are already very hard to damage, And then on top of that, they have a special rule which makes them even harder to damage. So that's the actual issue with Imperial Knights. The Chaos Knights are barely at the bottom of the range. If you're shooting for 45 and they're 47, any more changes to Towering Knights points or rules or something like that is going to adversely affect Chaos Knights, probably bump them out of the acceptable range, and then Imperial Knights, likely will fall. So in my opinion, they have to fix something with the actual rules of Imperial Knights, not just do like a mass nerf that Chaos Knights get in trouble for. So then moving on, we have Space Wolves, we have Dark Angels, and we have Black Templars, all at the bottom of the acceptable range. And then we have the losers of the edition. So Astra Militarum have very, very strong indirect fire and lots of it. Don't have a lot of combat troops, and they are slightly out of the acceptable range. So it wouldn't take much to get them up a couple of points. Adeptus Astartes is probably the most disappointing. I think all factions should basically be balanced around Astartes. They make up the majority of the player base. And if you kind of roll in like Dark Angels and Blood Angels and Space Wolves and all of them too, they probably make up the majority of the overall players in tournaments. So Adeptus Astartes should always be right around that 50% mark, and then everything else should be kind of balanced around them, because they have like your base toughness, they have your regular weapons, they have all of what you would consider to be the measuring stick that everyone else should have to stand up against. Now, part of the issue here that Games Workshop didn't discuss, and we haven't actually discussed either, is would some of these factions be performing even better than they are if all the units were available for sale right now? And the answer is yes. For instance, Adeptus Astartes, if you could actually purchase Gladiator tanks right now, specifically Gladiator Lancers, they would be substantially better. Unfortunately, you haven't been able to get Gladiator Lancers for months, and that's probably the strongest piece in the entire faction. So the fact that you can't get the best unit in your army, let alone get 2 or 3 of them, probably is hurting Space Marines right now. In the same way that, for instance, with Chaos Knights, you haven't been able to get the Chaos Knight War Dogs for, well, literally since their release. They have been in and out of stock. They've been very, very difficult to get a hold of. And the best army for Chaos Knights right now is probably like 14 Armigers or War Dogs. So if you can't get one of them, or one pack of 2, you definitely can't get 14 of them. So probably that's hurting the Chaos Knights. So nobody is talking about availability of actual models from Games Workshop because half the range is sold out, but that is 100% a factor. I think that would help anybody that has key important units that are sold out and have been sold out. Probably their win percent would be bumped up a few percent if people could actually get the models that are good. Now a quick message from today's sponsor. CMO Games has been selling Games Workshop products online for over 20 years. They carry the full line of Games Workshop products, including Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, paint tools, and more. Almost all Games Workshop products are priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games takes pre-orders for most Games Workshop products released at their earliest date possible. 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, they go live. Most of these pre-order products are also priced at 15% off MSRP. CMO Games offer free shipping in the US 48 with an order of $50 or more. Their customer service is top-notch and they ship most orders within 24 hours. Visit CMOGames.com using the affiliate link in the description and let them know that you heard about CMO Games from Warhammer Man. Now back to the video. So moving on from there, we have Drukhari at 43, and that's basically like give or take a couple percent away from acceptable. After that, it really goes downhill. Blood Angels are terrible now. They saw massive points increases to their dedicated units like Sanguinary Guard, and they saw a massive nerf to their actual army rule. I don't know why Games Workshop changed Blood Angel's army rule to +1 strength and +1 attack on the charge instead of +1 attack and +1 to wound. That actually is a really, really good ability, +1 to a wound, especially with how tough vehicles are now. And in this edition, would have actually really helped out Blood Angels. So really all they have to do is just change the rule back. Just make it +1 to wound on the charge instead of +1 strength. And suddenly Blood Angels will surge back up to the acceptable level. You're welcome, Games Workshop. Adeptus Sororitas, I think the main issue with them and why they're performing so poorly is Games Workshop completely changed vehicles and made them super strong. The Adeptus Sororitas vehicles are okay relative to other armies' vehicles. But the issue isn't that their vehicles aren't good enough. It's more that they don't have the ability to kill other people's vehicles. Games Workshop basically created where suddenly things can have like up to like 20+ strength. So they changed all of these cool like Space Marine weapons and cool Xenos weapons and gave them ridiculously high strengths and damage and all this stuff. And unfortunately, the Adeptus Sororitas range, their main killing weapon was meltas. So if you're using meltas or multi-meltas, the AP is good, the damage is good up close, but they don't have the range that they need to shoot things from far away, and they don't have the strength they need to actually like hurt these big vehicles. So Adeptus Sororitas is suffering from just having old heavy weapons and none of the new cool shiny stuff. So World Eaters, they basically got their whole entire ability completely changed. I don't know why Games Workshop completely changed the dynamic of World Eaters. I thought the old way they played was much better than they are now. I think maybe they were afraid that if you're able to like Super Saiyan power up your army throughout the game, by the end it's like too good. But we see them letting other armies have the same thing. So it's very strange that they changed it from World Eaters like permanently powering up super abilities to World Eaters just powering up a couple abilities each turn. And for an army that only plays in one phase of the game, combat, they don't have any shooting that's actually good or very, very little. They don't have the psychic that helps out a lot of other factions like Thousand Suns. So basically, with the points changes and the other changes to their army rules and everything, they're just trying to like run across the board and fight stuff. And it's just not viable with their army anymore. And then we have Grey Knights. Grey Knights are super mobile. They have all the benefits of being a Space Marine, but without all the benefits of like the Space Marine tanks and heavy equipment and stuff like that. I do think Grey Knights overall can do good in this meta, in this season, but they just need a few more things. It is strange seeing initially people were very afraid for like strong psychic factions that they were going to really suffer without the psychic phase. But I think Thousand Suns are basically Chaos Grey Knights. So if you compare Thousand Suns at 53% to Grey Knights at 40%, a massive, massive difference. Maybe it's because they don't have the Primarch. Maybe it's because their psychic just isn't as good. But overall, Grey Knights are just missing all of the important pieces that they would need to win. Adeptus Mechanicus is just absolutely terrible right now. The army rule is kind of cool. It's interesting, but it's not necessarily that effective. I think a lot of where they're suffering right here is in ballistic skill issues. And honestly, I have to say, Adeptus Mechanicus, Tau Empire, and Leagues of Votann all are kind of suffering in the same area. They all have like weak ballistic skill and struggle to actually hit. When they do, they don't do like a ton of damage. They all just need some serious help. Death Guard is next. Death Guard, the main issue here is a lot of the same issues that Votann have. They're both durable, but they're both super freaking slow. And in this edition, you need to be where you need to be at the right times. So speed and mobility is key. And Death Guard and Leagues of Votann have very little of both those things. Death Guard really needed to have some kind of like feel no pain or something like that for army wide. It's very strange that that was like their rule. And then they even got like the -1 damage, which is really good. And now they basically don't get much of anything. It's very interesting that Imperial Knights, the most durable faction in the most durable vehicle edition of all time, start with a 6-up feel no pain and then have the ability to upgrade to a 5-up feel no pain. But Death Guard, well, 38%. So next we have Tau. Again, the Tau are very strong, but the hit to their ballistic skill just completely like screwed them over. I don't know why Games Workshop did that. It's very strange. It seemed like initially they wanted to make this less of a shooting meta, and then they did the opposite. It's an extremely powerful shooting meta. But I think in order to be at the top of the list in this edition, you need to have combat, you need to be mobile, and most importantly, you have to break the rules of the game, as we pointed out with the top 3 factions. And then finally, Leagues of Votann. This is a particular thorn in my side as I do love dwarves. I love Leagues of Votann. I created my own custom Leagues of Votann army, and they have just been terrible. Unfortunately, they got nerfed before they ever really got a chance to perform in 9th edition. They were definitely like the boogeyman in the room. Everybody was talking about how amazing they were, how broken they were. So Games Workshop completely ruined the codex before it was even legal, before it was even out, before you could even play with it. And since then, they've only just got nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. And now their actual army rule that was supposedly awesome and broken in the previous edition is now absolutely terrible. They rely on their units to die to actually like get better. They're extremely slow. They're not very durable, and their weapons are terrible. Their dedicated combat units are mediocre at best, and their dedicated shooting units are mediocre at best, which explains why they're the absolute worst faction. Not to mention, even if you did like Leagues of Votann, you have to understand that because they didn't have a dedicated player base, because they didn't have the same loyalty as the other factions, that when Games Workshop came in and beat them down, there was nobody to step up and defend them. So Games Workshop basically just nerfed the Votann into almost non-existence for another 20-something years. And they're going to honestly need a complete rework to actually be good, because just everything about them sucks. Very, very unfortunate. So yeah, so we see what makes the best factions top tier, and the top 3 factions all break the key rules of the game. So that probably has something to do with why they're the top factions. And the bottom factions are all missing something that allows them to either be a balanced faction or to function in the various phases of the game. They either don't get to participate nearly enough in the movement phase because they're too slow or immobile, or they just can't hit enough in the shooting phase, etc., etc. So when it's all said and done, I have to say the Games Workshop has done an absolutely terrible job. The new edition is cool. I like it. I like the idea of it, but they have done just an absolutely atrocious job balancing it. Their initial quick fixes to Deathwatch and then Eldari and Imperial Knights all helped out some. I don't know if they were just a little too quick out of the gate to nerf some things and didn't take enough time to see how badly they needed to nerf them. I don't know if it's because people were already winning with those factions, so even after the nerfs, they just kept winning with the factions. Maybe just not quite as much. I'm not really sure on that one, but we'll have to see how those factions kind of play out over time. But allowing certain armies to break the rules of the game while everybody else has to play by them is definitely a big reason why those armies are on top. I don't think it's going to take any massive changes to bring the losers up into the acceptable level. I don't think it's going to take any massive changes to bring the winners down into the acceptable level. But the fact that less than half of the factions are in the acceptable level is just absolutely pathetic. If I was Games Workshop, I would be completely embarrassed. If I was Stu and the rest of the rules writers and rules testers team, I would be completely embarrassed. To sit around and pretend like you even know what you're doing when we see these numbers looking like this is absolutely pathetic. So great job, Games Workshop. Awesome win rate tier list from them. And then meanwhile, they're pumping out Horus Heresy Knights that are going to continue to help break the top factions. Win rates continue to fluctuate as players grapple with the edition still in its infancy, figuring out the tactics needed to secure victory in a new rule set. There have been several surprise results as various tournaments that challenge the overall data, but enough games have been played that we can now pick up trends. And I do agree with that. You're definitely going to see like outliers, like a Death Guard player win an entire tournament and go undefeated. Maybe that player is just really good. Maybe they figured out something in the army list. Probably a combination of those two things. A lot of times when a faction that people don't see often or has been performing really badly wins a tournament, it's because people don't have experience against them. I don't want to say it's because of gotcha moments, but you're just not able to understand some of their abilities, or maybe they pull some like crazy jank out that you didn't expect. So there are always going to be some outliers. There's going to be somebody that wins a tournament with Leagues of Votann and everybody else is going to try to copy that list and not have the same results. Sometimes it's going to be random, sometimes it's skill, but the fact of the matter is the MetaWatch, the tier list is just way out of whack right now. Accordingly, the Warhammer Studio are already hard at work on the next points, updates, and balanced status slate for release this September, which will aim to lift struggling factions just as much as it reels in the top performers. Players can look forward to the upcoming changes and the arrival of Tyranid and Space Marine codexes this autumn. So we know when the codexes come out that the armies are going to get better because of power creep or rules creep. So Space Marines and Tyranids probably going to be lifted up very soon with their new codexes, as well as the intense competitive action of the Nova Open later this month. More information on these will be announced on the warhammercommunity.com, so stay tuned. So yeah, there we have it. We have the Games Workshop win rate faction tier list, aka the MetaWatch. I've been very positive about this edition. I do overall think it's a good edition. I like the rules changes for the most part. I just think Games Workshop needs to spend a little time and really reel some of this stuff in. They also need to address some of the issues that they haven't talked about, like availability of units. I think if Games Workshop changed nothing at all and they just got stuff back in stock and we waited 6 months, I think this would be a completely different tier list. Because if you go through Games Workshop's web store or just eBay or Amazon, whatever, if you just check the internet and try to buy every faction's top 3 performing units, most of those units are going to be unobtainable, and they're definitely going to be out of stock on Games Workshop's web store. So if you have an army like Eldar where everything is good, and then you have an army like Leagues of Votann where only one unit is good, but that unit is sold out, it's almost impossible for someone to do well with Leagues of Votann in that situation. So let me know what you guys think down below. Is there anything I missed in this? Is there anything Games Workshop missed in this? How are you guys feeling so far about the new edition? I think there's a lot of doom and glooming. I don't think that this edition is dead or unsavable by any means. I just think it's going to take some time and some actual hard work to balance this thing out. And I'm very disappointed by Games Workshop and their lack of abilities. And the truth is, after all this, we know that Games Workshop sends a lot of stuff to playtesters. Obviously, they only take some of the advice from those playtesters. But I think it's pretty clear at this point in time that they're just not doing a good job. Whether it's Games Workshop's employee playtesters, whether it is the community, what was even the point of doing any playtesting if this is what we got? So let me know what you guys think down below. Special thanks to CMO Games for sponsoring the video. That's it for today. Warhammer Man Studios, I'm Warhammer Man, and I'm disappointed in you, Games Workshop. Get your life together, and I'm out of here.